Hey marker heads, it's Karen! Today I have a tutorial on how I personally color night scenes with Copic markers. This is one of my favorite types of scenes to illustrate, and I hope this tutorial is helpful. I've had requests up the wazoo for this type of tutorial, so I hope it helps, and I'm trying to really keep it simple, so let's get right into it. So the first thing you need to do is to establish your base color scheme. In order to do this, you first need to know the difference between the colors artists typically use for day scenes and the colors that they would use for night scenes. When an artist plans a day scene, they use colors in more saturated tones. This is because the light from the sun is bright enough that we can see the true colors of the world around us. However, the low amount of light available at night inhibits our eyes from detecting color. As a result, it's harder for us humans to see warm colors, and it's much easier to see cool, desaturated colors. There's a lot of science involved in this, but I think you guys can get the picture from what I'm saying. To give you kind of a comparison, look at this picture of a dragonite who is out flying at night, and then compare it to this dragonite who is out during the day. Because there is less light, the dragonite in this scene has been shaded with cool colors. This dragonite is a much warmer color because of the amount of light in the scene. Now have a look at the colors of the environment in this scene, and then compare them to the environment in this scene. Just like the two different dragonites, the surroundings in the scenes will also be affected by the amount of light available. Another important factor when creating any sort of scene, the color of the light source also will affect the color choices we make. If, for example, we wanted to draw a sunset, our light source would be a really warm color. In the case of this drawing, the light source is yellow. In the case of this one, it is bluish green. In the case of this one, there are two light sources. One is the light bluish green coming from the moon, and the other is yellow from the glow of Umbreon's rings. Using multiple light sources takes a lot of practice, so for now let's just focus on using one. Because night scenes are naturally a cooler group of colors, it is best to have a set of blue markers ready for use when you start your night scene. Here are a few examples of color schemes that I like to use. If you want a better look at them, you can follow the links below so that you can read the little notes that I wrote next to them. These are my main three, but I do have a few others that I sometimes use, which I will also leave links to in the description. The color scheme I used for this tutorial was scheme number 3, the blue, green, and blue combination. It's my favorite one to use because I think it gives a much more dynamic coloring to a piece, and I wanted to illustrate a warm and clear night. Alright, it's time to color. Let's say you already have your piece sketched and inked and ready to go. The first thing I always color in my night scenes is the light source. In this case, the full moon is the source of light, so to start out, take your lightest color and sketch out a circle for the outline of the moon. It doesn't have to be perfect, trust me. In my case, this was BG10. Next, use your second lightest color, mine is BG11, to make a much wider circle around and slightly on top of your previous one. Try to saturate the paper with this color to keep it wet. This way the next color will blend into this one better. After your second lightest marker, you will need to use your third color, which should be a lighter mid-tone blue marker. In my case, this is BG45. With very light flicking motions that barely touch the paper, add little dashes of this darker color on top of your wider circle that you just drew. The farther away you place these from the initial circle, the blurrier the light source will appear. So I wanted mine to look pretty crisp, so I kept everything closer together. Once you make a small circle of these thin lines, create a solid outer circle around them with the same color. Again, make this circle pretty wide. You want the next color to blend with this one very well, so saturate that paper with ink. Grab your fourth color, which should by now be a darker mid-tone blue. Mine, for example, was B26. Make a circle of light flicks similar to the one that you made with the previous color. Then, as you did before, create a circle of this color outside the ring of flicks that you just made. Now that you're pretty much finished with your light source, you can fill in the sky. The first step to doing this is to color a tiny bit above the horizon line with your darker midtone blue, for me, B26, and then blending it down to the horizon with your lighter midtone blue, which for me was BG45. Next, blend along the top edge of your darker midtone blue with your darkest blue. Mine was B39. Now, before you forget, like I almost did, add in stars by outlining smallish circles in the sky with your darkest blue. They don't have to be perfect, and if you think you added too many, you can always color right over them. Blend the edges of these stars with your lightest or second lightest blue by coloring inside the circles. Yes, right now they look kind of silly, but it will look better once we are done. Now, avoiding those little stars you just drew, fill in the sky with a thick layer, or two of them, of your darkest blue. Again, if the stars are too odd looking, you can cover a few or all of them up. We will be adding smaller ones in later with a gel pen anyway, and this step wasn't really super necessary, but I think that some stars made with the white of the paper look kind of nice, so I decided to make some. Touch up the moon's glow by blending it into the sky color with your darker midtone blue. Then blend the darker midtone blue with your lighter midtone blue. And if you feel like it, you could even blend this lighter midtone blue with your second lightest blue. I personally didn't do that in this scene, although I'm thinking I might go back and do that now that the picture is finished. As a finishing touch to the stars that you made with the white of the paper, shape them into little sparkle shapes by dabbing a tiny bit of your darkest blue in 4 evenly placed areas along the edge of the circle. It will make a little sparkle similar to those shoujo sparkles that you see in manga and anime. Now that the sky's done, you're ready to work on the environment. The first thing you do in your environment is add a layer of shadows. This layer really acts as kind of a roadmap that tells you where to color and where to leave moonlit highlights on the environment. For this step, use a toned down midtone blue or green blue. I always use BG72 or B24. For the sake of continuity through the rest of this tutorial, we will call this the shading marker. For the distant hills, fill them almost all the way in except for a narrow strip of uncolored area along the top outlines. This uncolored area represents moonlight. For the bushes, the method is similar to the one you used to color the distant hills, except that you also leave narrow, uncolored areas that look like the outlines of leaves to break up the large space of the plants. So when you shade the grassy area, simply flick your marker in short, upward strokes that barely touch the paper. Make these strokes longer as you get closer to the viewer, and shorter as you get closer to the horizon. This helps create depth. Next, use your shading marker to add shadows to the characters and the blanket. The characters would cast fairly bold shadows on the blanket. The shadows that illustrate the contours of the blanket will be much lighter because I want the blanket to appear white to the viewer, so for that type of shadow I used BG11. Shade the clothing on the characters by illustrating the folds in the fabric, as well as filling in large areas with your shading marker. Leave areas of moonlight on the clothing. The skin of the characters we don't want to shade very dark, so shade their skin with a lighter marker. Mine is BG11 in this part. Now that you have the shadows of the environment mapped out, you can add flat layers of color right over top of them. Use colors you would normally use if the scene was a day scene. Once you add that flat layer of color down, you can start shading your environment with darker colors. Again, you can shade your plants and such as you normally would if you were coloring a day scene. Tone down those bright daytime colors with your lighter midtone blue, preferably the one you used in the sky. For me, that was BG45. The colors should now look more blue and the shading should be less bold. If you think that this kind of messed up your coloring and shading, you can go right back over it again and tone it down again. You can do this as many times as you need, but try not to do it too much or things will start to get really washed out. Alright, now let's focus on the characters. First we want to start with the skin. For the light skin character, we'll use a skin color like E30 or E51. I used E30 because I feel like E51 has a slightly brighter look to it, which is what I wanted to avoid for this picture. Fill in all the skin except for a narrow strip where the moonlight would be shining. Let the ink dry, and then with the same marker, darken some areas. Next, right along the line we left to illustrate the moonlight, shade the skin with a light layer of your shading color. Placing the shadow right along that light area creates the look of backlighting. I did this because the moon is actually behind the characters. It looks bold now, but we will change that soon. Blend the shading with your second lightest blue color. Finally, lay down a coat of your skin color that you originally used to finish it up. Yes, her skin still kind of looks like an alien's right now, but once we color her clothes, I promise it will look different. For the darker skin character, we would start the same way as we did with the light skin character, but with a slightly darker base skin color. I, for example, used E11 for this character. Fill in all the skin except for the highlights where the moon would be shining on it, just like the other character. Next, shade the skin with a darker skin tone. I used E13 for this character. Leave only a little bit of the first layer of skin color showing through. Next, you want to take an even darker marker and add some finer shadows on the character's skin. I used E25 for this part. Bring the first skin color you used for this character and blend all that dark shading out, but remember to leave highlights from the moon. Now find your trusty environment shading marker and shade this character the same way you would shade the light skin character using this marker. Use that first skin color you used for this character again to smooth this layer of shadows out as well. Now that the skin is colored, let's move on to the clothing. Because we shaded them earlier, when we went over the entire background, all we need to do to color the clothes is color them the way we normally would if we were coloring a day scene. The only difference is that you will need to leave a highlight from the light of the moon. If the colors look too bold, like the pink dress did here, tone it down with your trusty shading marker and perhaps a layer of your lightest blue color just for good measure. The last part of coloring your characters would be the hair. For the hair, you will need a mid-tone and dark version of the color you want the hair to be. If you were doing a close-up, you might want a light version of the color also. But since these are far away, I just needed two different colors. It's best to add your mid-tone colors first and leave highlights for the moonlight. Add detail next with your darkest hair color. If it looks a little rough, lightly blend the edges of the dark hair color using your mid-tone color. To finish off your picture, make sure you color in any details you may have missed. For example, I missed this sign and these little fence posts. And then add more stars with a basic white gel pen. Use the gel pen to add little sparkles and all the other pretty little stuff that a lot of people like to add to their art. Once your picture has been touched up, scan and post it for the world to see. Don't lose heart if your first try doesn't turn out very nice. My first night scenes were less than satisfactory. Just remember that the key to coloring well is practicing a whole lot, as well as observing the world around you. Incorporating what you notice about your environment in your art will give it a uniqueness that is all your own. Never forget that. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. If I need to improve on any of my tutorial making skills, please let me know. I always worry that they're too long or overly in-depth or too boring or they're too random, so any suggestions would be appreciated. Please be nice though, I don't normally make tutorials.